Everybody, welcome back to this month of Staffing Monthly. And I am really, really excited for this guest that we have here today. As you know, this month we are focusing on reaching out to the premier thought leaders of the industry, the coaches, the consultants, the people that the best and brightest agencies turn to guide them on their journey for growth. And the gentleman that I have with us today is someone that really needs no introduction, but he's somebody that's been in this industry for decades. He actually ran staffing regions to out in the Midwest for decades. And then he turned to his own company, Tallann Resources, 12 and a half years ago, because he had a passion for teaching other staffing professionals how to grow, how to perform, how to actually realize higher levels of success. And he's somebody that is one of the highest sought after speakers, well-accomplished author, and he is all things staffing and recruiting. And I want to welcome you, Tom Erb, to the show today. Thank you for being here, part of Staffing Monthly.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the introduction, all except for the emphasis on decades.
Oh, sorry, decade. You just heard the S. It was decade. That was it. No, I get it. Hey, you know what, man? There's wisdom and experience that comes.
Well, that's true. Yes,
being in this industry, and that's why people turn to you. That's why, when you ask just about anyone that's in an association or SIA or any group, like, hey, who do you go to for training or who do you reach out to? Your name is among the top of that list. So,
well, thank you. Thanks.
So because of that, that's why I reached out to you. We bumped into each other at the Aviante Connect conference, which was great to see you there. And I asked you to be part of this issue because I want to get a sense. You talk to, I'm guessing, hundreds of agencies and executive leaders on any given month, and they're presenting different challenges. They're kind of giving you insights into what's going on in their world. So just what are some of the biggest challenges, or what do you see as the most common trend of challenges that your contacts are bringing to you on a regular basis right now?
Yeah. So if you asked me 3-4 months ago, it would have been recruiting, and it still is recruiting. But I think it's recruiting with a caveat a little bit in that, we've been going through this time of increased inflation, certainly a ton of wage inflation. The talk about recession we've been talking about for months. Are we in a recession? Are we going to be in a recession? I saw a statistic the other day that was they did a survey of economists, and they said that over 80% of economists say that we have a 25% chance of going into a recession in the next 12 months. And I go, boy, that's about the vaguest thing you could possibly do. But
right?
But that's what we're hearing a lot now from owners and leaders of staffing companies is, it's, hey, I feel like it's kind of slowing down. Hey, we have less orders than we've had before. We still have hundreds. We just don't have hundreds and hundreds. But there is more of a concern of, do I need to beef up my sales strategy? And we haven't heard that for a little while.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies out there have continued to sell through this all and understand the value of constantly bringing in new and better clients and replacing your C clients with A and B clients. But a lot of staffing companies have taken their foot off the gas for a couple of years on sales. And so I would say that's the biggest thing that we're hearing is this. It's not fear yet, but it is some nervousness, some anxiousness around, are we slowing down? It feels like we may be slowing down. Of course, we're seeing it in different markets and different verticals to different levels. It's not a universal thing. A lot of staffing companies are just doing fine, but it is an interesting shift a little bit. I would also say for the last 2 years, I did nothing but speak on recruiting, and now I'm getting more requests to speak on sales. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift there, whether it's real or just perceived.
I think that's a good observation, and I think that is where people are seeing that they're shifting to sales because they're seeing their job order requests come down. But something you said, a way that you said it made me want to ask a different way is, if the job order come down, if we're getting asks for less and less people, yet our fill percentages historically have been lower the last couple of years because of the tight labor market.
Yeah.
Do you think that fill percent, like, if we're going to fill 70% of 100 orders or 200 orders, like you're still going to fill that percentage. Do you think our fill percentage goes up and it's just like we can actually fill more of the orders that we're technically getting from a percentage standpoint? Do you think that like we'll see an impact there, or maybe the labor market will loosen a little bit and we'll we'll be able to fill more of fewer orders but still grow through that? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think in some markets we are seeing that a little bit in some verticals. It's interesting if you look at unemployment, we're at 3.5%, but there are markets that are at 2.0, 2.2%, and then there are other markets that are at 6%. So it's not like everybody's at 3.5%. So
Right.
there are variations, and then you've got some different verticals that have certainly slowed down. Healthcare, we've seen that post-COVID. Certain areas of IT we're seeing slow down, and especially in certain markets like in California and some of those areas you're seeing layoffs. So I do think in some places there is new um, talent that is coming out onto the market. It's not enough.
Right.
And then also people point to 11.5 million open jobs and how that dropped to 10 million last month. And I really chalk that up more to companies giving up on filling jobs than I do really that there's been a decrease in the number of jobs. I mean, we see that with restaurants all over the place where
Yeah.
they're just not open Sundays anymore because they can't staff it, or or they don't open for lunch anymore. Or, we're seeing a lot of that too. So
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I had that same thought as it's like maybe companies are just realizing like, hey, having 11.5 million open jobs is not sustainable. So we just need to rework how we work. So
yeah,
I had that same thought. I think it's a good observation. So
yeah.
if people are coming to Yale still with the recruiting challenges and they're saying, hey, Tom, we think maybe we need to get around our head around sales and get out in front of this. How are you advising them to balance it? Like, how are you navigating your contacts through that change?
Well, it's really it's going back to the fundamentals of having dedicated salespeople to go out. It's really there's a couple of prongs to this. So you want to go out and get your new business, right? You want to always be going out there and talking to companies. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there right now because so many staffing companies have backed off of sales. They're going to start all getting back into it, but we've got a little bit of time where we could get out there where maybe there isn't quite as much competition. So it's getting out there and bringing in new business. It's being very selective on the business you bring in. Don't bring in more C orders. Don't bring in more
Yeah.
C clients, right? Um, and sometimes that's tough to do, but so you've got that piece to it. But the other thing I've really been talking about a lot, I'm actually doing a session next week at Staffing World about that, and is on account penetration. And the fact is that 10, 15 years ago, it was not uncommon to be exclusive with a client, right? We were the
Right.
only staffing firm. Um, that's unusual now. Now
Yeah.
they're using 3, 4, 5, even more staffing companies, which means we have a smaller piece of the pie, which means there's more opportunity for us to expand into existing clients. And with most of our clients, when we really start to analyze that, you could increase your business 20, 30, 40% just by really focusing on your existing clients. And that's even before you go out to look for others. The other thing is the whole concept of skill marketing, as far as finding really, really good candidates. And when things do loosen up a little bit, we'll start to get some good candidates that we can go out and market. And it's just like it's kind of looking for low hanging fruit while you're trying to do the sales, the new business development, which takes a little bit longer.
So I love that. And actually, it gave me so many things I wanted to dig into there. The first observation I want to make is I think is really astute that what you said, and I'm going to read between the lines a little bit here. You made the comment that if you get out in front of sales now, you're going to basically beat the rest of the competitive market to the sales game. If you start now and get at it.
Yeah.
And if you stay selective and you focus on the A's and maybe B's, but you turn away the C business, what's going to happen is the C business that really wants a partner that gets turned away. Those are going to be what's the majority of the market when the rest of the staffing competitors catch
Right.
up with their sales process.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of beating out your competition at another level. So
Twice. Yeah.
I think that's smart
Right.
that you framed it that way.
Yeah. You're leaving the scraps. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and it's even, there's even another component to that, is that the C business almost always tends to be the easiest business to get,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they burn through all the other staffing companies, because they're, and they, there's just so many different reasons why they're a C account, right? And they look at every staffing company as a commodity, and they're interchangeable and all this. And it's like, you reach out to them as a salesperson and they're, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll give you a chance. Here's a couple orders, work on them. And you're going, wow, great, I got a new client. And it's like,
woohoo,
no, you got to see client, and
yeah.
that's really burned through everybody else. It's always, sales shouldn't be that easy. So it's, if it's that easy, then all of a sudden that's a red flag.
No, that's true. And the observations about actually growing your existing business and actually just growing through establishing a better market share position with your clients is spot on. And
Yeah.
that really should be step one. You should really evaluate your own book of business and say, hey, who are my A clients and B clients where I can pick up that market share? And that should be part of the strategic plan. But let's dig into the other side for a second, because I'm a student. I've watched your stuff. I've read your book. I like the 13-week plan. Like, I like that model of prospecting. But COVID was the great disruptor. It was the great kind of digital transformation. So how do you think that affects some of the old school fundamental sales techniques that we cut our teeth on, like the cold call or the
Yeah.
letter or the
Yeah.
postcard? Like, how does that affect like those more fundamental techniques now that we're super digitized?
Yeah. Boy, now you're going to make me sound like I've been here for decades. I know, when we talk about the old school stuff of the letter, and when you start talking about door to door cold calling, the interesting thing about it is that, um, I'm a big believer of going where the competition isn't. And I get a lot of people over the last few years, particularly with COVID, they go, people aren't, our prospects aren't working in the office. They're working from home. Should we still be sending a letter? And my response to it has been, you kind of answered your own question. The fact that you're questioning whether or not you should means that other people are questioning whether they should, and they're not, they stopped sending out the letter. And so in that case, there's even less competition now. And the other thing I always say to people is, they go, if companies haven't figured out how to get people mail by this time, then they got bigger problems, right? And so yeah, I tell people the letter actually works in many cases just as well or better than it did pre-COVID, because there's less competition for it. Same thing with postcards. Because the assumption is that nobody's looking at mail anymore, which obviously isn't the case. They got to look for bills. They got to look for,
Yeah.
other important pieces of mail. Cold calling, I've never been a huge fan of in-person cold calling, just because I think there are more efficient ways to sell. And I think also, if you're selling at a consultative level, that it's hard to be consultative when you walk in and ask interrupt somebody's day.
Right.
That being said, I will say that there is an opportunity there, because over the last 2.5 years, people have forgot how to even go on appointments in person. And we talked to sales reps that in many cases, a lot of sales reps, they've so gotten out of the habit of in-person networking. We're talking to people all the time. We're going to events where they're the only staffing company that shows up,
Yeah.
because all the others have stopped doing it, because they've just gotten out of the habit of it. I've talked to clients of mine and I've said, let's start networking again. And they go, you know what? I used to network all the time before COVID. I just forgot to do it.
And we loved it, right? Like, that was the
Yeah.
fun part of selling and
Well,
prospecting, was the
exactly. Yeah,
networking.
it's the best part of selling. And but with cold calling, it's the same thing. It's that, everybody was so conditioned for so long of, nobody wants me to walk in there because of COVID. Well, now we've got some sales reps that are going out there, and even in some cases, some sales reps that didn't traditionally cold call, and they're having success. They're talking to people. They're getting so. I've never been the biggest fan of it from an efficiency standpoint and other reasons. You go out, spend an afternoon, you hit 10 places. That's not a lot of production for a long period of time. But I do think that right now you go where your competition isn't, and so there are opportunities with that. So, and keep in mind, you're selling to multiple generations too. So I get a lot of more your Gen Z who are going, well, I never even look at my mail, or I never do this. It's like, well, that's not who you're selling to. Remember, you're
Right.
selling to 4 different generations here. So
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It's actually smart to apply that generational at least lens to that, because you're not always selling to the person that represents you, So
yeah,
that
exactly.
that
Yep.
makes sense. I think that's great insight on the sales side of it. But staying on the topic of like the digitalization effort, what do you think the impact of how much the tech stack has become a integrated buzzword in our industry, and all these new resources are coming out, the latest, greatest shiny objects to, optimize the staffing industry. We've seen an influx of it, and our industry has typically been a bit of a laggard when it comes to technical progression. So
Yeah.
what are you seeing on the landscape there? As far as tools, tech stacks, like what do you think is the taking shape in our industry right now?
Yeah. The one of the positive things that came out of COVID was the adoption of so much technology, because you're absolutely right. We tend to be slow in this industry to adopt technology, and COVID forced us to do that as an industry. So you had a lot of people that were not used to doing it, but all of a sudden they're sitting at home and they're going, how am I going to onboard people, because they can't do it physically? So they get onboarding technology, and we've also seen over the last few years the maturation of candidate engagement software. And I was saying, prior to the pandemic, I was saying, candidate engagement in the next 5 years is going to be the same as what we think of texting platforms back then. It was, for a while, texting platforms were brand new, and then all of a sudden it became commonplace. Everybody had texting platforms.
Yeah.
Well, now candidate engagement is getting to that point, especially when you have some of the largest ATSs that are buying up candidate engagement software platforms, or they're having much more seamless integrations, and it's just becoming much more commonplace. The next iteration of that are the mobile apps and the mobile websites, and that's where we're headed with that. On the sales side, well, on the candidate side too, but on the sales side, we're seeing automation take play such a big part. And now all of a sudden, instead of a sales rep trying to reach out and call 150, 200 people in a week, they can scale through automation, different types of automation technology, and they can actually reach out to potentially thousands, and then drive that back to them. You can score people on their engagement level. So you reach out to prospects and you do this automation, and then the system is scoring. They reach a certain score, and it can drive those highest scoring, highest engaged people back to the sales rep. They can pick up the phone and call those people, because now it's a little bit warmer, because they've seen that they're interacting with emails and different types of things. So technology, I think, has made huge strides in the last few years, and a big part of it was COVID, but I also think a big part of it was just the maturation of some of this technology. It went from being beta to really being doing what it was supposed to do 5 years ago.
So that's amazing. And I'd love to pick your brain more on that sales platform stuff, because I do feel like that's one area of our industry that is often neglected or overlooked, as far as like the tools, the resources made
Yeah.
available to the true sales facing people. But maybe another conversation for another day, because I want to ask this question. With all these new tools coming out and access to all these resources, do you feel that our industry is equipped or doing a good enough job training their people on these new tools to make sure they're successful using them? Or do you think there's a gap there, to make sure that the recruiters and these professionals that are getting access to these new tools, do you think there's a gap in skill development to really get the most out of them?
Well, I think there's always been a gap in training in general, and I'm sure that's not limited to staffing. It's just the only thing I know. But um, it the um, there certainly is a gap in the technology, and it starts with the applicant tracking system because everything builds off the applicant tracking system,
Yeah, that's the
right?
hub.
And so if you're not fully utilizing that system, then all the other stuff isn't going to work right. And we see that a lot. So, the way that a lot of it's set up is really if you just train them in the applicant's tracking system so that they can get more and more efficient at how they use it and they use it the right way, um, then a lot of this stuff like candidate engagement, mobile app, that kind of that's either a lot easier, or it's even not even, they don't even have to do anything. It just supports what they're doing. They can just do what they're doing in the applicant tracking system. Maybe they change a field in there, which triggers somebody into a workflow that's in a candidate engagement workflow that they don't even need to touch. So I do think that there always should be more training. And training is a tricky thing with technology too, because when do you train somebody? Do you train them before the technology goes live? Do you train them after it goes live? You really should be training them through the whole thing.
Right.
But it's always a challenge from a timing perspective is how much do we train them before? How much do we train them right when it goes, and how much do we continue to train them? So
So I agree with that. I think training needs to be programmatic. It needs to be ongoing. I don't think human beings are, I hate to say it, I don't think we're sophisticated enough to learn something one time and then just adopt it and have it be,
yeah.
mastered. I think we need to kind of always be reinforcing, especially in such a chaotic industry. But that being said, what from a best practice standpoint, what have you observed from we'll say an ATS partner that complements the training? Like, what's the best class practice for getting training resources from the technology partner, but also having a training and development expert on staff to make sure that training is adopted and continued forward? Like, what's a best practice model for that?
I think it depends on the size of the company. Certainly, somebody that has 5 users internally is not going to have a dedicated person.
Right.
Um, it also just depends on the ATS. There are some ATSs that have fantastic online training. They have fantastic, they'll have monthly live webinars. You have all sorts of things, and then others have much, thinner training resources. So I think the first thing to do really is to look and see what does the ATS have. What are all the things? Because I find that a lot of companies don't really leverage what the ATS does.
Yeah.
And in many cases, I'll talk to somebody and I'll go, well, they have monthly, ask the expert webinars, or they've got a full online library that you can reference, and you should have it be integrated into your new hire training. And if you're doing implementation, you should have it involved in that. But there does have to be, with the staffing company, there has to be somebody or some people that are responsible for making sure that everybody gets trained and that they're using things efficiently. I was talking to a client of mine earlier today that had recently switched over to a new system, and we were talking about you're now moving into this user adoption change management phase.
Yeah.
And so, you need to be running these numbers to see page views, notes, some of the different features that they're using that are designed to make things better, like auto matching candidates and utilizing the job board broadcasting capabilities of the ATS. You need to make sure that people are doing that and get down and isolate it down to the branch and the individual level, because you may have, overall, we're doing okay, but this branch is crushing it because the branch manager is all over it, and this branch over here is not adopting it at all. So rather than treat them the same, let's
Right.
go over and fix this. And then maybe this branch that's crushing it trains people within the organization because they're an early adopter. But we got to keep looking at that, and then we identify what the training is. So first thing to do, look at what that ATS offers, use that as much as you can, and then from there build off of it however much you need to.
Smart. I wholeheartedly agree with that. So Last question I want to ask, since I want to be respectful of your time today, is going back to the 80% of economists suggest that we're 25% likely to go into a recession. And I think
Yeah.
the real truth is that no one really knows what's going to happen. And the
Yeah.
world seems to be falling apart for everyone else, but no person, right? So
Right.
what do you think is going to happen? I'm not asking for a definitive, prognostication, but like, what do you think is the likely scenario that staffing agencies need to be prepared for?
So it's a good question. If we look back at the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, the staffing industry, what it typically does, which is we nosedived and we dropped like 40% as an industry, except for IT staffing. And
Right.
IT staffing stayed flat. So the reason why IT staffing stayed flat was because they had a talent shortage. And so what it did was it actually, for a little bit of time, it actually allowed them to grow a little because they had positions they couldn't fill. So when you started to have some layoffs, you started to have more movement, they actually had a little bit more talent for a while, and then it kind of leveled out. That's where I think we're at. I've been through, I think, 3 recessions, if you don't, um, not even counting the April 2020, nosedive. This won't be the same one we've had in the staffing industry. This, if we do go, I think it's quite possible we'll go through a recession. We may have already gone through one. I think everybody's kind of playing with the definition now, whether or not we went through it. But and it'll be one of those things like a year from now, somebody will say, "Oh yeah, we did go through a recession. Now we have all the data." But
Yeah.
I do think we'll go through a downturn. You can't have this kind of inflation, indefinitely and not do something. There's also a lot of world events that could play into it too, so we don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think we'll go through a downturn. But I think if anything, um, it will it will free up some talent to allow us to fill some jobs. And the thing you got to look at is we hit over 12 million open jobs a couple months ago, and then it was 11.5 again, and then it was down to 10. Even if it drops in half to 5, that is still higher. That would be a record high after 2018. Like in
Right.
2020, at the beginning of the beginning of COVID, we were at 7 million. That was an all-time high at that point. So even if we drop in half, we'll be at 5 million. That's still a high number. There's still going to be a real shortage. And then we've got all these macroeconomic things going on, such as baby boomers are retiring at 3.5 million a year now. We don't have enough people coming into the workforce to nearly replace them. So that's going to continue to happen and continue to spur on the talent shortage. So that's a long, convoluted answer to, we're going to go through a downturn, but it actually could be somewhat welcome, especially if we're prepared for it and we're out there selling like crazy all the time.
So I completely agree, and I think that's an astute observation. I really like that you created that kind of a analysis to IT stayed flat during the last recession because they were already in such a tight labor market that
Yeah.
coming down didn't really get them down below the demand line,
Right.
right? And now
Right.
we're all sort of in that. Most verticals are sort of in that spot right now.
Right.
So maybe we don't realize as much of a nosedive. We get a chance to kind of get some more talent to make placements, and we can stay at flat as the economy goes turbulent. So
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Tom. I'm grateful to have you here, man. It's always a pleasure to pick your brain and just get your wisdom that you share with this industry. I'm grateful for it. If anyone here, for some reason, doesn't know how to get a hold of you, but if they do, what is the best way that they can actually reach out to you to learn more about you and the training resources you provide and how you can help staffing professionals and agencies grow and scale?
So I would encourage anybody to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's always an easy way to do it. But also our website, tallannresources.com. My email address is tomerb@tallannresources.com. And so, would welcome anybody to reach out.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here. We'll get all those links on the page right here. Definitely reach out to this guy. He is one of the premier trainers and consultants in the industry. He's been doing it for a while, and he's helped a lot of companies improve what they do and realize success. So Tom, thanks for being here, and we will catch up with you next time.
Great. Thanks, Dan.